Hello, Mr. Chamberlain here. Today I want to talk about OMC Sterndrives a little bit. It is an older Sterndrive that has been discontinued since the 1990s, but there's still quite a few of them out there, especially on lakes. I'm going to go over the design of the drive, the shifting of the drive a little bit today, and some of the special parts and designs of the drive. So first off, let's start out with the design itself. It is much like Alpha 1 Sterndrive. It has a lower unit shifting sliding clutch. That means that the drive also needs some type of shift cutout mechanism. I'll talk about that in a minute. It has what's a nice feature that they designed was a removable water pump back here. You take this plastic cover off and there are some bolts here to remove the whole water pump assembly. So you can take that out and service that without taking the drive off and dropping the lower unit. Like an Alpha drive, you have to split the case. It bolts on just like an Alpha 1 Sterndrive, so there are 6 studs on each side. You take the nuts off and pull the drive off. You have a pin design much like the Alpha drive where it holds the trim pistons in place. I've removed those so you can see. So you want to take those out, take the fasteners out. You can take the pin and keep it with it. I like to leave the pin on the drive back here so you kind of have a pickup carry handle. The other feature about the drive is the drive mounts just like Alpha drive, so that means that the transom assembly is similar. The cutout for the transom assembly is a US standard cutout that's used by Mercruiser, that was used by OMC. It's also used by Volvo Penta in their SX and DPS drives. So in the event you've got an older boat with one of these in it and you wanted to upfit it to an Alpha or upfit it to a Volvo DPS or SX drive, the transom assembly cutout is the same. You might have to do a little bit of modifications, but the drill pattern, the bolt pattern for the TSK transom assembly kit is another term that they use, is the same. So on this drive, essentially what you have is you have the lower unit, you have the upper gear case, you have your pivot housing, sometimes called the bell housing by Mercruiser. You have your gimbal ring here, which allows the drive to steer. I'm going to turn the drive here and show you the back side of it a little bit. We'll go over some of these features. Make sure you can see it. That looks fine. All right, I have the trim pump mounted here just for ease of maneuvering it around the lab. Normally it will be bolted to the transom someplace. It's a 2-bolt design. The transom assembly has the inner transom assembly, so this would mount over the outer transom assembly that will have studs on it, and you just simply slide that in through the transom, slide this over it, bolt it in place. It has a similar design to Volvo Penta drives, where it has a mounting for the rear motor mounts here. Those are actually mounted onto the transom assembly first before you put the drive in. It's much different than an Alpha drive. You have your water pickup tube. This is a stainless steel water pickup tube. You have your steering arm here. When you put this back together, one of the important things you want to remember is bonding wire. So this bonding wire has been broken off. It's like this in a lot of situations. That wire would be a long stainless braided wire, uninsulated, and it would mount to the steering arm. So the idea of those internal and external bonding wires is to prevent galvanic corrosion. So what you need to do is, if you're going to change this assembly, is to make sure all those bonding wires are in good condition. They're not broken, they're not missing. Look in the service manual, make sure that they're there. That way what you have is you have the same voltage potential in the outside to the drive, to the trim pistons, to the inside to the battery. That way you don't have any differences in voltage potential. Every molecule has its own voltage potential, so aluminum has a higher voltage potential than stainless steel, and that's why you have to tie everything together. Otherwise you're going to get a transfer of electrons to electrons from molecule to molecule. molecule, which is stainless steel to aluminum, and the aluminum always loses outside. Bonding is very, very critical. I can't stress that enough. So when you're servicing these, or you're changing them out, or you're removing them for transom work, it's very important those bonding wires go back together. So very similar, what you're seeing is you're seeing the drive shaft come through from the Sterndrive here. It's very similar to an Alpha drive when you look at it. One of the big differences is the design of how the shift cable is installed. So this is one of the key features that OMC and Volvo use that Merc Cruiser does not use. And that is where this cable goes through the transom assembly to shift the drive. This is the Sterndrive cable. Is they use this piece of basically wire reinforced, very thick hose. And this hose has to be mounted above the water line. So if you are removing this, you're taking it out, you remove the engine, you take the transom assembly, you're gonna put it back together, you absolutely have to make sure that this cable, or excuse me, this hose is above the water line. And then that would go to the shift bracket. So this would come off to the side, and it will come around, and you wanna make sure that you tie wrap this up in place, or if there's a bracket that holds it in place, you make sure that that goes back on. There's usually a cap on this too, a little rubber cap. It really is not a good seal. So the problem is, in the event that you remove the transom assembly, you take it all apart, or somebody takes it apart, and this hose is below the water line, when the boat goes in the water, you're going to siphon and possibly sink the boat. So that's one of the things you want to make sure that you do. They use a standard old red jacket cable. Originally, this is an original Sterndrive cable. You can see it's pretty beat up from being moved around here in the lab. But the newer cables that you can order, they're still available. They go together somewhat like a Merc Cruiser cable with a bracket here with two set screws in it and a collar that comes off. This comes in the kit as well. So I think that is most of, excuse me, most of what I wanted to talk about. These two bolts here last is where your steering mechanism would go on. If you have power steering, then the power steering adapter will go here, and then your cable will go on top of it. If you have a mechanical system like a 4-cylinder engine, you just have a rack and pinion steering, then that cable bracket would mount right here, and that will hold that assembly in place. All right, next I'll remove the drive. I'll go over that in the next video, and we'll go over a little bit more about the shift cable assembly and how that's put together, and some of the problems with that you may have when you have a problem with the shift cable.